Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our final lecture in the Interior Design Lecture Series. It's really my great pleasure to introduce Jaime Velez tonight. He's the Director in charge of Interiors at SOM and has done many architectural and interiors projects in the United States, in Europe, and in Asia. I met Jaime in my first job out of architecture school at SOM, and so we worked on projects in Spain, mostly in London, and it's really exciting to see his a career kind of take this great direction. His role always was very insightful in design. He used to say that you can tell the designers at SOM from the architects just because, you know, we would wear these purple feathers in our hair. But it's really about having a commitment to the way people interact, designing the space, having an understanding of the atmosphere, and really coordinating the design concepts together with the engineering concepts, the architectural concepts. And so this knowledge that Jaime has, not only of architecture and spatiality, but also of furniture, of detailing, of knowing how to integrate design from the part to the whole, I think is something that really makes his work outstanding in interior design practice today. So I'd really look forward to seeing the work, and please join me in welcoming Jaime Velez.
Thank you, Catherine. Well, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So the focus of my presentation is going to be the work of SOM. I'm going to be showing a couple of projects that didn't come out from my studio, but came out from some of the other offices because I thought they were relevant. I think what it is important about the talk that we're going to have is just what I want to do is I want to set the stage of what were the circumstances that generated a specific project, and talk a little bit about the relationship between the client and the designer and how we can, by working together, how we have achieved what I believe is an interesting portfolio work. The focus of my practice has been mostly corporate, commercial, but there are with a couple of minor tries in hospitality and residential, and furniture in particular, which I enjoy very much. I do believe that everyone is probably familiar with the work of the firm. And I think what it is important and relevant is this whole issue of the multidisciplinary practice. I think that creates a different designer, a different architect, and a different engineer. The fact that we're all under one roof and they're all working under the same, in the same project and trying to achieve the same. These are some of the applets of the firm. We do have offices in a variety of cities, including San Francisco. In fact, our firm is responsible for creating some incredible projects here in this city, such as the Bank of America building or the International Terminal at the airport. There's a fact that maybe not many people know, that SOM was the firm that established interiors as a separate practice. Before SOM started it did not. It was just people were really scrambling, trying to figure out what to do. SOM in the 1950s does decide that they want to create a specialty of interior design that is seen the same way as architecture is, the same way as engineering is. So I'm going to take you very briefly through this kind of history of the firm. This is the Connecticut General Life Insurance, perhaps one of the first projects in which the interior designer, in which the practice of interiors was established as a separate identity. From the get-go, interiors has always been very intrigued in the interaction between design and artist. For this particular project, we have 4 courtyards that were designed in conjunction with Isamu Noguchi. So you begin to see sort of like the touch of the architecture, the artist, and then we'll begin to move into the interiors. So in interiors from the 50s, after World War II, American manufacturing explodes and then begins to have this incredible amount of space that is being created. You begin to see the rigor that SOM begins to establish in these projects. This whole idea of a modular ceiling that incorporates lighting, that incorporates the partitions. Interesting to think about that SOM began to work with movable partitions in the 1950s, that right now they're so in vogue and so in style. Along with the office space, they have to take care of some of the ancillary spaces. So the design of cafeterias, the beginning of designs of big, large gathering spaces, these auditoriums that are very unique, and up to this point have been only. It was part of the sort of public events, only in the public, not part of the private sector. Furniture, the furniture that was developed was mostly residential. So begin to develop a line of options of furniture that begin to could be used for corporate design, very important. From there we move to the 60s. You know, we talk about green and we talk about sustainability. This is a building for Weyerhaeuser, the paper corporation in the state of Washington. Look at the green roof. So, but in conjunction with that, in Germany there was a movement that began to talk about open office space. So this is the first project really in the US that begins to adopt a 100% open space. So you begin to see how it begins to incorporate light, it begins to incorporate views to the outside, and a completely nimble environment that is interchangeable and it is that it could change over time, not only for the support, but even for the executives. You begin to have a very different attitude in the way this is developed. There is also a large refinement to the common spaces, where the common areas begin to be more concentrated. Then we go to the 70s. The firm has always had a large history of work overseas. This is a particular small project in Guatemala City that begins to look at the influence of textile into, and then the colorful textiles of the Mayas begin to migrate into the design of the architecture for Banco de Occidente. This one in particular I find very intriguing. I think it's a very well detailed space and speaks very highly of the type of work that the firm was doing. Then the crazy 80s arrive, and then there's the financial markets completely change the landscape of design. At that time, this was probably the largest interiors project the firm had ever done, about 3 million square feet for Merrill Lynch. So begin to really look at the advent of technology and the computer as a big driver of the interior space. But in conjunction with that, there's also, you know, client services and the whole issue of hierarchy within the office. So that begins to be addressed sort of in a different fashion. That kind of brings us up today. The first project that I'm going to talk about, one of the people that worked on this project is in the audience. So if I'm making up stories, please correct me. It's, for those of you that are bilingual, it's also in Spanish, the slide. So we talk about how does one migrate from a line of business to the office space. This is the headquarters of Hyatt. Hyatt is owned, or it was privately held at that time by a Chicago very wealthy family. And they wanted to create a new headquarters with a new feel. However, unfortunately, they went into this building that has an odd shape because it was designed for legal practices. But you know, going back to how does one define the identity? So we began to look at Hyatt became really famous for the design of the atriums, the first firm that really introduced the atriums as part of their signature. And in fact, the one here in San Francisco by John Portman, which is the first one on the left, is just probably one of the best example of that. So how do we carry that to the design? What do we do to this space? And as I said, to make matters a bit more complicated, you know, we have a building with this odd shape, which really doesn't it lends itself to have cellular offices in the perimeter, and the lease span is about 40 to 45 feet. So from there we begin to try to redefine a new paradigm. So looking at a new material, so just trying to blend this whole issue of hospitality, but at the same time, this is not, I mean, this is a place of work. This is not a hotel. So we began to introduce a different set of materials. If we look, for instance, the drapery is all metal, so it begins to speak of the traditional materials of hospitality, but we interpret it. You know, we look at the main lobby. So let me take you here for a moment. So this whole idea of the atrium, even with that thin of space, we decided to take a slice of the building and then begin to develop the sense of community, which is, I think, in essence, what the atrium is trying to achieve, but obviously with the restraints of a very narrow lease span. So all these spaces, which are intended to be collaborative areas where, you know, coffee breaks, or you can go and get a drink, or you can go and run into people, began to get introduced with the same vocabulary of materials as the main entry. But then the atrium itself is done in glass. And it's done in glass, again, just trying to maintain the hard line tradition of office design, of office development. You can see the level of attention, the level of detail to the space is quite great, and it begins almost to feel like a little small restaurant rather than a pantry. The boardroom, you can really begin to see the juxtaposition between the newer technology and then the idea of utilizing a more traditional, more Japanese-based design that has a different flair to the space. And bringing that even to the workstation, which is kind of unusual, to really begin to incorporate the idea of having walnut panels. So the project, has the same vocabulary from the whole to the pieces again, and then, a break room. From here, a big part of what I have done is just focus on legal practices. And so you understand the extent of the projects at that time. This is the largest law firm in Chicago. It's about 750,000 square feet. And the project was completed 2 years ago. However, if you look at this timeline, which I'll go very briefly through it, you realize that the process was a process of about 10 years. And with a heavy, heavy emphasis on research, trying to understand who they are. And what was really good about it is that the project became almost a pseudo build-to-suit. So we got a chance to begin to develop the building module, begin to look at all the amenities, begin to look at all the technology to support our clients' needs. The project has a very interesting conference center that is very different, because there is a migration right now in law firms. There are less meetings in the office, but there's more training that is required in-house. So it functions as both. There's 2 floors, about 50,000 square feet. And then you'll see we studied every possible configuration on how they work and how they operate, and then came up with this idea of this pairing up of conference rooms with these little small pantry/support spaces so they could operate independently. This is a set of doors that can close in here, so you can tie one to this one, tie to the other one. So during closings, begin to function from one side to the other. This could work as a caucus space for impromptu meetings in between. So the synergies between both, and then that was developed as a template that was repeated throughout. And then we carried that language also in the admin floors for the firm, and then the floors for the lawyers. For the lawyers, we began to look at, and that's one thing that I think it is really important that we're doing right now. It's looking at what we have branded as multiple futures. And it is this whole idea of how through the life of a lease, a space can morph and change. So everything that you see in WIFE are these series of modular pieces that could be changed as the work processes begin to migrate. And then the ratios between support and lawyers begin to change. What was interesting is we work with an Italian manufacturing company for the case goods called Unifor. And we developed with them a kit of parts. If you look at these 4 offices, you'll see that they're all different. However, they're all made out of the same pieces. We worked with the manufacturer and the dealer in the sense, if you buy a high-end car right now, you can go online. If you buy a BMW, and then you can begin to put the specifications, and at the end you will see an image of what the car would look like. So we did exactly the same thing with them, a program similar that empower the lawyers to begin to work. And then, as you can see, the settings are so completely different, but it was all controlled by us to a degree. The variables were tremendous. So in fact, we had to write a couple of different programs to be able to handle all the choices. But I think the end result was quite interesting. You begin to see this is the main space, the reception area. Reception areas have to do dual purpose. So there's lots of parties that are thrown and receptions that are thrown here. So the reception days becomes a bar at night. So that began to inform the material selection. We looked at solid surfacing for that. And then from the beginning, again, back to when we saw the Isamu Noguchi courtyards, we worked with Mr. Finch, the artist, to develop this light sculpture that is called H2o Molecules. So begin to really incorporate art as an essential part of the space, as well as working technologically. These doors are 14 foot tall, and then they open at a flip of a switch. You can really control, and then you begin to have a space that is much more interactive, and then expand the size of the reception area if needed. The furniture was all Moroso, and it was selected in particularly to be able to be relocated and to be moved easily, so the space could function again as open. For those of you that have spent winters in Chicago, you realize that the lack of green becomes very apparent once February arrives. So we began to introduce these built-in gardens that were part of the space. You get a sense of, this is the suiting of the conference rooms. You see how conference room on one side, on the other side, and then the support is in the center. We had to work technically. The technical aspects of our work are quite intricate, particularly for these practices, privacy, acoustical privacy. It's a must. So to be able to get these clear stories in glass, it was quite challenging to be able to achieve the sound transmission. This was actually a really fun part of the project because we were looking as to how does one redefine the old phone booth, since we don't have phone booths anymore. And so during the break time, how can clients begin to interact in a different way with the BlackBerry and then the laptops, and then just become much more interactive, much more flexible. And again, the introduction of art everywhere. The project has this beautiful terrace that overlooks the Chicago River. But what was interesting from our respect, we were the ones that determined the depth of the terrace in looking at the type of events that they were going to host and how that could be organized along the space. Bathrooms, interestingly enough. I mean, I don't remember the last time someone showed a bathroom. Someone told me that looked like a sushi bar. But the idea here, again, as you can see, there is a migration of detailing from hospitality, more hospitality born into what could be, more of a mundane space. For the lawyer's offices, began to try to maximize the amount of light. The expenditure, the monies that were allocated for this part of the project were not quite as substantial as the meeting space. Nonetheless, it has a fairly similar and a lot of rigor to the way it is designed. The offices themselves, for the associates, all the work surfaces are height adjustable, beginning to really look at the ergonomics of the workplace, to respond to the different needs. I get another shot of what the offices look like. All of these pieces are removable. All of this. So a rail system by Unifor, so it could be reconfigured in a variety of different ways. And then again, if you look where we started with the first cafeteria that I show you, I think we've come a long way just trying to provide environments that are more inviting. Work is not exclusively done in private offices anymore, so just trying to begin to create an environment that is more interactive and more enlivened. Financial institutions, once in a while you have an interesting client. This client came to us with a new line of business right before our economy tanked in 2008. So they wanted to create a private wealth center for individuals that for private investment for single individuals that would have to start with at least $10 million to open the account. So it was generating these small teams of traders that would work for the private investors. So it had a very public area where the clients were, and then the rest were a series of very small teams of highly focused. So we spent a lot of time back and forth going with the client, determining the number of brokers. At that time, again, they didn't have this line of business. It was a new line of business for them. So we began to look, decided that 6 was the right number, and beginning to look at how the public portion of the trading versus the private interaction between them and among the members of the team, working out all the details. That gave way to just the ideal module, and then everything within it is movable. So we look at a variety of iterations of how this could change. But we did spend a lot of time detailing and making it feel rich and luxurious and unique. What was interesting is we did 3 of them in the States, one in Chicago, one in Atlanta and one in Houston, and then our client said, you know, they need to look like they're members of the same family, but they're not twins. They have to be, they all have to have their own sort of geographical identity. We were toying with the idea of looking at stone in a different way here, and then we were looking at a stone as being something that is more malleable. When I don't even know why we were thinking that, but so we began to look at this the reception desk, almost like a handkerchief, like a piece of stone that you pick up from the floor and it begins to fall. So you see the high level of attention to detail, sort of the typical language, which is very minimal, but at the same time luxurious. Another picture of the detail of the lacquer wall, the stone wall in the front, how the curved wall responds to the doors, and then from there you go to the work areas, which are a little more down and dirty, and you begin to see how a lot of time spent looking at different options for lighting, and then the lines of sight for trading, etc. So once in a while you get an opportunity to do something that is all about image and luxury. Our firm, our Chicago office, did the tallest building in the world, the Burj Kalifa. And with this project, it came the private offices of Imar, the chairman of the corporation. So you see kind of how the tower is organized and is zoned. So the offices are these three spaces on the top level, 152, 153, and 154. They're the highest offices in the world. Very, very small footprint. I think the footprint per floor is about 2,000 square feet. So what he wanted basically, if you look at the plan, when you take the elevators out and the stairs and the service elevator, you basically have a fairly small room. So the program on those three floors was, one was a meeting space Arab style, which is called majlis, where they have to sit around sofas, so it doesn't have a center table. The second floor, 153, was just a meeting room, Western style, a boardroom, and then the top were the chairman's offices. So basically, it was just a very small, and then they were all interconnected by this beautiful stair. The idea of the stair, we wanted to create a stair that appeared to be floating. You get some views of the building. Just for reference, the Address Hotel, which is this building, is 65 stories tall. And is dwarfed by the height, and the offices are in this step, right about here. We also, as part of the project, worked on all the public spaces. So began to sort of morph and create a different environment, the introduction of wood, introduction of leather, so just sort of like soften the effect of, and also we work with Jaime Velez, the Spanish artist, to begin to define, you know, how you enter the project, to just sort of like create a different impact. We still once in a while draw by hand, and we have people that began to look as to how this whole idea of creating this stair could be possible. Here you get a sense of what the stair looks like. It spans the 3 floors with these cables, and as you see, the granite treads appear to be completely floating as they climb. You get a sense as to what the space looks like with the fountain down, and then the Middle Eastern style of meeting space. You'll see with the furniture all around. We go up to the meeting, that's the chairman's suite, but it was somewhat modified furniture-wise at that time, with a more intricate design for the ceiling, more like a modern interpretation of Arab style, Islamic. Once in a while, you get some issues with clients that are a bit odd. This is a guy that purchased a building in Chicago, which was done during the 80s, sort of like the heydays of the postmodern movement. The building is intended to look like the Rockefeller Center by Raymond Hood. And this client, he wanted to look this as modern as possible, his offices, the private offices. He's extremely minimalist. And so if I don't have a shot of the elevator cabs, but they're all very traditional. They're all done in burl and bronze. And as you walk out, another thing, he didn't want any signage whatsoever. And he decided only to occupy not even quite close to 2/3 of the floor and leave the rest empty. but he wanted the reception to be close to the view, so he wanted us, through the design, to give clues as to how does one get to the reception. So if you saw the elevator, you'll see quite the contrast between that. So it's just, we look at this German glass, very different technology. The way it's treated is quite beautiful. And then the introduction of that wall, that it was skewed on color. There was no signs, there was nothing. So as you came out and then you went around and then you enter the space. The photographs are done and this one is more, are done in color, but the whole space appears to be black and white. He only allowed us to use one color, and he wanted everything to appear to be almost, everything that was stone to be carved out of stone, and then everything that was metal to be very simple. Able to define sort of a different type of workspace. He wanted it to be all open to the above, to be connected, so there were no private conversations, but there was a sense of privacy down in the space. China, an interesting paradigm. A lot of the work that we do right now, we do support to our base building teams, and as such we do all the design for the lobbies. This is quite a complex. This is a new building in Tianjin that is about 500 meters. Extremely complex. It's mixed use of office, service apartments, hotel, and retail. So the lobbies are quite, the functions are very difficult. We have the office portion here, we have the service apartments, we have the hotel, and then we have a connection to the retail, to this area. So just trying to figure out how does one develop a language that is a common language to this was quite difficult, while at the same time working with the architects. So one of the first things that we looked at the circulation patterns, just trying to define how one may introduce some barriers from one to the other. Also, to make matters more complicated, there's 3 different architects. We're doing just the design for the office, and then these 2 are going to go to different architects, but we wanted to make sure that at least the building read as one from the outside. So this is the canopy as you get dropped off. The city is a little north of Beijing, so it's a very cold city. So we wanted to make sure that we created a space. The client was very specific. He wanted to do something that felt warm and inviting. So we came up with this idea of a cloud. And then this cloud is made out of bronze. And then it begins to migrate. You can see it begins to migrate, and then it changes, not only in plan, but changes 3-dimensional to the undulation to just create this feel. And then it begins to unify all the lobbies. Did the same thing with the flooring material. Get a sense as to what the cloud feels like. So the cloud, let me show you the details. So we were looking at these bronze blades, a combination of bronze in 2 different types of finish, to just give it that idea of this shining, glimmering sky, and began to look at, this is how we do our work, begin to the introduction of light fixtures, how we're going to put it together, how it's going to be supported. Same things with the floor. And so we determined in our initial design that we were going to do 3 screens to separate the different ones. And the screens we wanted to feel like rain. It's interesting when we work with the Chinese clients, metaphors work well as a client. They like them, they understand them. So we were talking about the idea of this rain of gold, basically. And then we're looking at a way of tilting different elements that are mirror, that have gold leaf in between. So they begin to cast light in a different fashion. They begin to be more dense as you get towards the bottom. So this is the final result. Theoretically, it was just sort of this whole idea, almost the ceiling is getting deconstructed in the same way that the rain comes from the sky. And it begins to be more solid at the bottom when you really, just to give you an idea, the floor to ceiling on this project is 12 meters, which is about, over 35 feet. So it's a very, very tall space. So we're trying, again, control the visuals at the bottom and then allow the light to go through so you still have a sense of that it was one design. So this is the view from the other end. These are the elevators, the shuttles for the parking. And then looking at the elevator lobbies themselves, looking at different types of how to approach. We do a lot of conceptually begin to look at how the lighting may work. most of the times we work with a lighting consultant, but then we usually start with an idea, and then they help us realize this idea. And here, basically, we're looking at two. The first one is these blades of glass. The second one, it was just this idea, again, almost the same thing as the rain, but a rain of light in this particular case, more control. And then, again, these crystal tubes that are suspended, that begin to trying to control the scale of these very, very narrow, very tall spaces. We do our materials, we typically present in trays. We don't do material boards like a lot of firms do. Allow us to move them, allow us to put them everywhere, to touch them, to feel them. We feel that they need to be more interactive. And then this is sort of like the final view. And I'll take you very quickly. We did another scheme, and a scheme that began to look at a core for the same type of project that kind of in which the walls from the core begin to open up and then create the spaces. The geometry extremely challenging, and I think that, unfortunately, I think this is the direction that we're following because it's quite complex. But let me show you what's interesting is we began to look at a new way of lighting, creating this mega chandelier for the office portion that will begin to, again, our idea is just, though that this may be done by a different designer, that at least there is an element, and those elements are floor and ceiling that are constant. And that's, so with this type of drawings, with this type of inspirational images, we begin to have the dialogue with the lighting consultant, the lighting designer. And then, the same things. Same thing, we get to do it in Moscow. This is we're doing the tallest building in Moscow right now. It's a residential building. Well, it's a complex that has both has an 82-story tower that is residential, and then it has a 60-story tower that is offices, and it has a hotel in between that has a kind of an interesting geometry. So we were taking clues from that geometry to develop the design for the residential lobby. This is the entry. We have the reception, we have a waiting area, mailboxes, and then the migration through where the elevators are. Security, very, very important in Moscow, particularly for this type of client, which are high end. So we're looking at a different material, begin to look at a lobby that is all wood, but begins to respond, let me take you to this, somewhat to the geometry that you saw, the swimming pool at the bottom. So there's at least a dialogue. Unlike that office space that I showed you for the German client, I think we wanted here to a dialogue between the base building and then the interior architecture. For them, we developed two schemes. This is one of the schemes. So the whole idea is that this is almost a luminous wall, a luminous ceiling within the wood slats, and then the geometry begins to migrate. Here you go into the seating space, and originally we were looking at this whole idea of a fire and water space, and then the mailboxes are behind these slats, then the waiting area. And then in conjunction with that, we look at a scheme that was a little more radical, that begins to look at ceilings and walls and floor with a different type of geometry that begins to direct you in the way to find, to discover the other spaces. The introduction of art on the walls at an early stage, and sort of a very, very different way to define what you would see as a residential lobby. We're still working with the two schemes in tandem. The client likes them both and haven't decided which direction he wants to go yet. We are working right now. This is probably one of the most interesting projects that the Chicago office is doing right now. This is it was labeled as a zero energy building in China. It's not going to be 100% zero energy, but it's quite aggressive in that regard. It's our first commercial large building to be platinum LEED certified. This building works in a way, I don't know if you get a sense of these holes. The position of the facade is done in such a way that it catches the wind, and we have these enormous turbines to begin to generate power. All the sides are photovoltaic. It has a double window wall. It's a lot of interesting, very interesting and innovative ways of dealing with technology. But the space that we were working is just right now is the top, and the top is just sort of a club and a high-end gathering space. our office and is engaged with the school in developing these phytoremediation strategies. The findings are that the roots that are exposed over plants are much more efficient in terms of cleaning the air, and as such, the amount of makeup air that is required to bring into the system gets reduced by about 30%. So we began to look at, how do we introduce this whole new concept. This is still being tested out. This is not 100% proved yet. And we were looking at, again, at different ways of what would be the visual manifestation of the elements or the different types of typology of plants. And the space is organized that way. But in our case, it was just looking at the cores and how the cores, you have the elevator overrides and machine rooms, could be done in such a way that would create a visual interest and at the same time would help us control, again, minimize the amount of energy that is to be spent in that area. Once in a while we get interesting, this is a small building, but not so small. It's a building that we did in Dubai, 30 stories of office and 30 stories of residential, and then we got a chance to design the penthouse, but the penthouse was for rent, it's not to be sold. It was so interesting because you really don't quite have a program. However, we have an incredible space with a swimming pool, and then just try to organize a clarity between the public spaces, the private spaces, and service in between. A selection of materials, since we don't have a specific client, that try to develop a palette of something that could be neutral enough that may appeal to a variety of customers. I think the most interesting part of the project is this swimming pool on the 60th floor with an incredible view of the Burj Kalifa. Then we worked with the architects to begin to develop a screen over the swimming pool. We worked also, the place came furnished, so we worked with Armani, with our Armani Casa, to begin to select all the furniture for the space. And again, as you can see, tremendous rigor to the selection of colors and materials. Very simple, very direct, very clean. Another interesting project in Telluride, we have this client from New York that purchased a resort in Telluride and said that he wanted the rooms to look like they were located in Park Avenue, because it was trying to appeal to the New York clientele for high-end. So we have actually very small suites that were 450 square feet. So, and then we need to incorporate part of that, a small kitchen, a closet, because this were for sale, so where people could keep their wares while the unit is being rented, with a closet for the renters. And then we're looking at this whole idea of a bathroom that could be almost deconstructed, so in order to give a greater sense of spaciousness, so you begin to see how it really doesn't feel like Colorado. It feels a little slightly different. The introduction of the fireplace, which technically was quite complicated to begin to get it to vent. Tremendous amount of time was spent in looking at lighting and looking what was the most practical way of getting the bathroom to open up. You get a feel as to why that ceiling that is carried through the space is like. And the vanity behind, it was interesting because the mirrors slide open, and as they slide open, you would have all the shelving and everything that you needed located in that space. This has got to be the world's smallest kitchen. This is 36 inches, and then we have a burner, and then we have a sink, we have a refrigerator, and then we have a microwave. So just trying to create, to be very space savvy. And this was probably one of the, and then we'll go more into the side of furniture. We're designing a new building for the University of North Carolina for the biology department, the genomics. And we spend a lot of time working with the scientists and the professors. And then they talk about this whole issue of interaction and the whole idea of having to work in teams, but at the same time having to control the level of privacy. So with our team, we came up with this idea that perhaps the best thing to be is just a closet. So this whole idea of having two doors and then that you may close or open, and then, but how do we interpret that? So we came up with what we call the Biopods. And these biopods are 7 feet in diameter only. And as you can see here, allow you to, they're movable, they're on wheels, and then they allow you, the building has an underfloor air distribution system, so there is no, I mean, they could be placed above and they will always be the climate control, and as well as they could be plugged into the floor, and then allow the people to really control the amount of interaction that they would have. The slide that we saw before, it shows you this is traditional planning for workstations, and this is the planning that we could have if we were to look at the biopods. And then you'll see how a landscape of them feel like. And lastly, we were invited by Formica. Formica invited a series of architects to design a piece of furniture to be auctioned off, and the only requirements were that it had to be a chair and it had to be made out of a Formica product. With our team, we decided that the best thing to do would be to use plastic laminate, because it was probably the signature material that they have. Since then, obviously, they have had, you know, solid surfacing, things that are more malleable, and then there's more plasticity to them. But we wanted to look at plastic laminate, and we wanted to look at see how far we could bend it. You see at the top the beginning of the sketches that we did with the team as to how that may be. We built a series of small little models in our studio to begin to refine it. It was this whole idea of just trying to really push the technology and begin to see how tight we could get the radius of the pieces. We developed all the working drawings. It was a little complicated because the ergonomics of a chair are quite different. And I think, in fact, every time I see the final product, I realize that it needs to be shrunk by, it needs to be like 85% of what it is at 100%. We work with a mill worker and then beginning to develop, to turn the prototype into the real chair, and then begin to just really work out that radius of what it could be. And we call it a dancing line because we wanted this whole idea of almost like a line that begins to migrate and begins to generate. So these are 2 sheets of plywood, of Formica over plywood. And we wanted to push the plywood as far in as possible, so this whole idea of these 2 floating elements. You get to see what the detailing, we use a laminate that's called microdot, so it has a very small pattern to it, so it has a little bit of a texture, begins to help accentuate the curvature of the chair. You get a feel what it is like from the back, what it is at the front. And that's it. Thank you. Any questions? Yes. Yeah.
I was wondering what the relationship is like between the architecture department and the interiors department at SOM on a given project. Is there a handoff at some point, or is there always dialogue back and forth?
No, there's, well, when the project first arrives at SOM, there's a series of brainstorming sessions, and then the brainstorming sessions include the architects, the structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, our high performance groups, and then the interiors group. And then what we do is begin to help set out the lease spans, the module, and so as the project continues, it is simultaneous, it's a back and forth. There isn't a handover. So it's extremely interactive, and if the project is, like right now, we just got a new project that it's about 10 million square feet. When the projects get to be that size, then there's a portion of the interior studio that moves directly, and then we create a team to handle that project. Yes?
I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about the amount of people it takes to make some of these projects.
Well, I would say obviously it depends on the size of the project. I would say probably, well, it's hard to say. The teams vary. Sometimes it could be as large as I don't see a team larger than 10 to 12 people. It's probably the largest team we ever had in our interiors group, but it's usually teams of 4 to 5. We do have a model that is sort of interesting that we call the studio model, in which the people follow the project from beginning to end. Oddly enough, our New York office uses a different model where they have design and technical. So there is a handover from the designers to the technical side of it. Ours is more comprehensive, but perhaps business-wise less efficient. But I think it ultimately creates a better designer, a better architect. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone.